that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Arena, who's the special agent in charge of the FBI. He's someone who's been working on this case longer than I have.
Thank you, Barb. A little over 3 years ago, I returned home to assume the current position that I have to run the FBI in my hometown. And the first question I was asked was, when was this day going to come? And over the last 3 years or so, I've been asked that question numerous times. Well, the day's here, folks. We reached that day. And I can tell you right now, there's no celebration in our office. There's no celebration here in the U.S. Attorney's Office or any of these other federal agencies. There's a feeling of satisfaction, a job well done, but a job that's still not complete, and we're going to continue to work forward. I think that these charges will bring forth and show to the citizens of this area the abuse of power by certain individuals, and certainly shed light on some of the activity that's been going on here for far too long. I was recently asked by a member of the media, when is this going to be over? Wouldn't it be nice, and I'm paraphrasing, wouldn't it be nice to say it's done? Well, it would be real nice to say it's done, but this is the real world, and it's not done. And we're not going to be done until we bring all these people to justice. It's not going to be done until all the public officials realize and understand that they serve the citizens of this city and of this area, and they take that seriously. And it's not going to be done until we say it's done. I don't know when that day is going to be, but we're going to get there. I assure you that the men and women of the FBI, of the Justice Department, are not going to stop until we give the citizens of this great state and this great city the representation that they deserve. I just want to thank Barb McQuaid. Her leadership and her foresight has really brought us to this day, and she's an outstanding leader, and I really want to thank her and the prosecutors who worked tirelessly on this. All the other federal agencies who worked so hard with us to bring these indictments forward. And I certainly want to thank the FBI agents, many of them who are standing in the back of the room, many of whom have long since left us. But they're here today, and I thank them, and I tip my hat to them for a job well done. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Eric Martinez, who is the special agent in charge of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigations Division.
Thank you, Ms. McQuaid. Good afternoon. This joint investigative effort was obviously very thorough, and our objective is always to uncover the full extent of the evidence as presented in the indictment. When greed controls the decision-making process of our public officials and the people that they surround themselves with, financial fraud and deceit is likely to follow. Internal Revenue Service has the unique role of following the money in these types of investigations and exposing everyone that thinks bribery and corruption is a normal way of doing business, because it is not. Specifically as it relates to the tax charges, I want to remind everyone that income from any source, and whether that's cash or otherwise, including illegally derived income, is subject to income tax. Public officials must comply with the law just like the rest of us. They're in a position of trust, and they know their duties. Now, according to the indictment, Mr. Kilpatrick not only knowingly failed to report illegally derived income, it is alleged that he took steps to conceal his financial activities. Now, he did this with the help of his associates. Concealing financial activities from government authorities is one common indicator that other dishonest activity is occurring. Internal Revenue Service, along with our law enforcement partners, will continue to focus our attention on this financial investigation and ensure the public that no one is above the law. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Jeff Martinez, who's the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency Criminal Investigation Division.
Thank you, Ms. McQuaid. Good afternoon. Many of the projects listed in the indictment are important projects for the city to complete to improve and maintain its ability to comply with the Clean Water Act. Fraudulent activity involving pollution-related projects is an important and extremely matter for the Environmental Protection Agency. Today's announcement should send a message to municipal employees and government contractors everywhere that such behavior is unacceptable. I would really like to thank and compliment the United States Attorney's Office, the United States Attorney, and all of our law enforcement partners for their tremendous interagency cooperation and hard work that led to the charges in this case. Thank you.
We'll take your questions now.
Why are the companies not identified? They're just company B, company L, etc.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And I don't think we're fooling anybody by naming them as company D or company I. But it is a Department of Justice practice to not name in an indictment companies or individuals who are not charged. And in this instance, there are a number of companies whose activity could be described even as victims, who are victims of extortion. And so in those instances where it was important for ease of reference to include a name, we included those names. And certainly the public does have a right to know all of the facts and who is involved, and that information will come out during the trial, and those names will be presented in their full names at the trial. So that's the reason. Yes, sir.
A question for Agent Arena. Can you explain maybe similarities or differences between this case and your work previously in Youngstown?
That's a good question. My wife, who's from Youngstown, always says this reminds her of a big Youngstown. I think I don't know if it's quite as systemic and widespread as what we saw when I was in Youngstown. But there's a kind of a mindset or a psyche that it's accepted behavior. I think we're starting to get beyond that. I guess that's one of the things that I'm happy to see, is I think we're getting behind that feeling here in the city of Detroit in particular.
Teresa? For the repeated, this isn't the end here. What more can you brace for?
Well, I think this largely concludes the investigation against Kwame Kilpatrick, Bernard Kilpatrick, and others in that inner circle. But we continue to investigate other related defendants. But the significant piece of this case is this case. Of course, we continue to investigate other allegations of public corruption, not only in the city of Detroit, but in suburban communities throughout the Eastern District of Michigan. And we are committed to holding accountable any public official who tries to steal from the taxpayers.
So when we say that we're far from over Kilpatrick and his inner circle, we're done with them now. So anything else coming out would be maybe something in the suburbs or maybe other city employees.
Yeah, I don't want to go so far as to say there will be no further cases, only because there are some peripheral investigations we're looking at, but largely this is the Kilpatrick and inner circle case that we've all been waiting for.
Were the RICO statutes used to prosecute this and you apply those?
Yes, this is a violation of the RICO statute, which is stands for Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. But it charges that Kwame Kilpatrick kind of used his public office as a corrupt organization and as an avenue for unjustly enriching himself and his associates, to include his father, his friend Bobby Ferguson, and others that he was associated with. Yes, sir.
Carlina Kilpatrick is mentioned in the indictments also as being somebody who may have benefited financially. Is there a reason why she's not facing charges?
There's not evidence that she's committed any crimes that she'd be charged for, and so that's the reason.
Can you give us an idea of the evidence that you guys have gathered? Is there some idea of it? Is it all witnesses who claim to have done this? Is it a document? Is it a combination?
Well, the evidence will come out at trial in terms of details, but in terms of categories of evidence, I can tell you that there are hundreds of witnesses and hundreds of thousands of documents that were reviewed, and the relevant portions of those documents and witnesses of what will be used at trial includes text messages, includes bank records, water and sewage department records, contracts, a variety of different kinds of documents.
Penalty-wise, what are you looking at if they're found guilty on any of these charges?
Maximum penalties are 20 years imprisonment.
Per charge?
30 years for mail fraud.
And I'm sorry, I'm corrected, 30 years for mail fraud. Theoretically, a judge could stack all of these charges. And there's 38 counts, I think, but realistically, the judges apply the sentencing guidelines to look at the specific nature of the offenses as well as the nature of the offender to craft a sentence that is appropriate for that case. But the maximum statutory penalty, because it includes a mail fraud charge, is 30 years.
Have you determined, a financial amount that the city has suffered?
Yeah, it's difficult to quantify. You know, there are tens of millions of dollars in contract revenues that were involved here, but it's a little bit difficult to quantify the loss because in some instances, you know, Bobby Ferguson in fact performed the work, but it could have been performed perhaps at a lower cost. So it's difficult to quantify. We know that he paid Kwame Kilpatrick, for instance, $400,000 in cash as alleged in the indictment. We know that Kwame Kilpatrick had $500,000 in unexplained cash in his bank accounts. But in terms of being able to say the net loss to the city, I don't think at this point we can quantify that.
You can't quantify it in the definitive number, but you talk about 13 projects with the water and sewer department, and you mentioned there, like you said, tens of millions. He, a lot of times, is the low bidder, but he also has the highest change order. Are we talking millions, tens of millions? And how much more do these projects cost us because of this corruption?
Yeah, it's hard to quantify, and I can't do it today, but his revenues were in the tens of millions. His revenues. Now, I suppose any legitimate contractor, honest contractor, also would have had revenues in the tens of millions, though at a number less than that. So I can't quantify the difference between those two numbers.
Well, the EPA gentleman talked about the Clean Water Act. Were any of the jobs done substandard, or did it just cost us perhaps more money than it should?
The allegations don't include anything about substandard work under the Clean Water Act, but we do turn over every stone. I can't speak specifically to this investigation when we receive allegations like that, but there was nothing specifically mentioned in the indictment here today.
This is for Ms. McQuaid. Did you ever consider filing charges or looking into, or did you investigate the mayor's former chief of staff, Christine Beattie?
I think I'll decline comment on that. We certainly have gone down that road, but I'll decline comment in terms of our treatment of that individual.
Under a RICO, there's a forfeiture aspect. Is there anything in this 89 pages or 90 pages or so that would indicate that you're looking at getting property back? Anything along those lines?
I think we'll be seeking money judgment in terms of forfeiture, and that's an issue that will be litigated and a number that will be determined by a jury. We'll present evidence on that number, and eventually a jury will decide it, and the forfeiture will be sought in terms of funds, cash.
It's just cash, it's
Correct.
not actual properties?
Correct.
Do you have an idea of that number, roughly?
That's a number that we'll litigate and will be determined by trial, so I probably ought not to comment.
Million, under $1 million, over $1 million, tens of millions, just a rough...
The number we're seeking, can you ballpark it?
We don't have a figure at this time.
Okay, I'm sorry, we don't have a figure at this time, I'm advised.
Just to clarify, we see some quotes, conversations quoted in the indictment. Are we assuming that possibly that did come from text messaging?
In terms of what's quoted in the indictment, we yeah, I probably should not comment on all of the evidence and all the ways that we obtained it, which will come out at trial. But I think it is safe to say that some of them came from the text messages.
As you guys were going through the investigation, can you comment on the type of arrogance involved in the different schemes that you came across?
I'd probably rather not comment on that. I'll let you folks draw your conclusions from that. It's a detailed indictment, and I think you can probably draw your own conclusions from the information contained there.
Not sure if it falls in your purview, but so many of these contracts were reached because of fraudulent means or coercion. When it comes to the contracts, do they all still stand?
Are they mostly concluded, Mark?
Most of them are, but to the extent that there's a problem, that's what the city decide.
Yeah. Well, the contracts are largely concluded, but when they're not, that's for the city to decide, I suppose, what they want to do going forward.
They're not automatically just stopped because they were reached in this kind of manner.
No, but it would be, a defense a party could assert if they chose to.
Of the defendants in here, which of the defendants would you say engaged in the most egregious behavior?
Well, certainly, Kwame Kilpatrick, Bobby Ferguson, and Bernard Kilpatrick were involved in very egregious behavior. It's hard to rank order all of them, but if you read through the indictment, you'll see those names mentioned most frequently. In fact, probably Bobby Ferguson most frequently of all.
As it relates to water and sewerage, there was judicial oversight in place at the time overseeing the water and sewerage department. There were companies. There was at least one company hired to oversee contracts of a certain amount. How did all of this escape Judge Fiken's oversight and the company's oversight that was hired to review contracts over $500,000?
I think they're just another victim of the efforts to conceal the true activities of what was going on in the Water and Sewerage Department. You know, they were victims of fraud just like the rest of us.
When you talk about the beginning of this start in the State House, did they look at the mayor's office as an opportunity to make cash? Were they creating that scheme when they were running their campaign?
I don't know if we have evidence to show that that was the sole motive for seeking that office, but we do have evidence and allegations in the indictment that that's the way they ran things when he was a state rep, and that's the way they ran things when he was the mayor.
I'm sorry to keep harping on the evidence issues. I know you don't want to relate too much, but I mean, can we safely say text messages, wiretaps? I mean, how far can we go in saying?
Yeah, you know, I am not at liberty to discuss the evidence at this time. You know, Department of Justice policy requires us to sort of speak to what's in the indictment, and the method of collecting that information is not in the indictment. So I guess I can't really tell you how it was obtained, but it certainly will come out at trial, and I think it's safe to say we've used every investigative tool imaginable.
Timeline for trial?
Not yet. The indictment was just returned today, and so, you know, the next step would be to schedule an arraignment, and at that time the court would, you know, set a next date, whether it's a status conference or a trial date that'll be set. No, so far all that's been done is the indictment has been returned by the grand jury and presented to the court.
Have you thought about bond for any of these people? If they ask for a personal bond, would you consider that?
You know, we have not made any representations on that issue to the court yet, so I think it would be inappropriate for me to make comments about that right now.
Are they going to be turning themselves in?
I don't think I probably should not comment on that either. That's, you know, that's an issue that we'll work out with them and their attorneys. Teresa?
Were you close at all to any plea deals with any of these?
You know,
Derek Miller.
Again, I think that's probably not an appropriate topic for us to discuss. They're presumed innocent and have a right to a fair trial, and if they choose to exercise that, then we will, you know, everyone will have their day in court.
If the departure of Mr. Kilpatrick from office, does that make it easier? You talked about how the big administration had helped provide witnesses and records. Can you describe the efforts to conceal the conspiracy during? Obviously, there was an investigation going on during his administration.
Well, certainly, I'll speak sort of hypothetically as opposed to in this particular case, but, you know, as you can imagine, when you're investigating someone, you can't go and ask them for records because you'll tip them off that you're investigating them. So the departure of the Kilpatrick administration certainly gave us a new opportunity to go into the city and ask for certain kinds of records and talk to certain kinds of witnesses, and that access was very willingly and cooperatively granted. Other questions?
Just one question about Victor Ricardo. I know he was an employee, if you will, with the city. Was he a willing participant in this? Obviously, he was someone they were working through, but is that your statement?
Yes, we charged him because we believe that he was a willing participant in this conspiracy.
Was he brought in because Kilpatrick assumed that he would be? I mean, is that why he was appointed to?
I don't know what motivated the appointment, but he certainly participated in the illegal activity. All right, well, thank you. Teresa, one more?
I'm so sorry to harp on this. So can we say we have wiretap evidence or no?
No, decline comment.
Were there other people that were not...
Listening to U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid right now, wrapping up a lengthy 6-year investigation. She says, quote, this is the Kilpatrick and Inner Circle case we've been waiting for, but she says it is not over. A handful of indictments coming down.
And we'll have much more on Action News at 5 and on WXYZ.com. Stay with us.